Hello, and welcome to another presentation as part of BAASS Connect Virtual 2021. This session is going to review employee expense tracking and approvals using Norming Resource Manager as the application. My name is Robert Lavery, President of Robert Lavery and Associates. When we think about organizations today, and how we've had to move to remote models of processing and interacting with our workers, with our associates, and with our customers and suppliers. The number of ways that we can work are growing exponentially because of the access to the internet and mobile applications that are making it possible for employees to work remotely from home or while they're traveling, to the extent that we can still travel during a pandemic. And one of the ways that we want to be able to track employee expenses and improve the auditability of expense claims is by capturing the activities that give rise to these expenses as close to the activity as possible. So that means when people are traveling, whether they're at the airport, at the hotel, or at a remote office, they're able to enter and submit their expense claims. Managers and supervisors can approve them online. And once those transactions have been approved, they automatically appear within Sage 300. So what we want to talk about in this session is how you can cost effectively incorporate this kind of an expense claim process with proper controls into Sage 300 for remote workers who don't normally log into Sage 300. But for the accountants, they're able to safeguard the integrity of the data within their system with proper audit trails. So as I mentioned, our focus is Resource Manager, which supports anytime, anywhere capture of these activities with online approvals and email alerts on any mobile device with full integration to Sage 300. So we're looking at Resource Manager, a web and mobile-based employee portal to track employee expenses. Now, when we think about a portal, when we're talking about a web portal, that could be the Sage CRM solution that provides a web-based access in a browser to information about our customers and our marketing activities. As Sage 300 has issued and released web screens for the back office accounting modules, it creates a Sage portal where accountants can log in through a browser to access general ledger, receivables, and payables information. With Resource Manager, we're talking about an employee-based portal where employees can enter and submit expenses or other types of transactions, as we saw in the previous presentation on purchasing, payables, and timesheets. And this allows employees who don't log into Sage 300 access to information within Sage 300 and then being able to record entries, get them approved, and they automatically appear within Sage 300. The web portal can be accessed through a standard browser-based portal, which is what you see on the left-hand side of the screen, or through a mobile app that is enabled as a native Android or Apple iOS application that can run on a smartphone or a tablet. So it's possible in the example of expense reporting to take a picture of a receipt, store that on your phone or tablet, and when you're ready to create the expense report, you automatically attach those details for airfare, hotel, taxi chits, whatever the case may be, and support the transactions on your expense report with these attachments. It's fully integrated into a back office Resource Manager module within Sage 300, so there's no rekeying of the data and no import-export required. And the Resource Manager therefore provides an all-in-one solution with a common interface through the portal, accessing Sage 300 in real time so that there's no rekeying, no importing and exporting, with workflow approvals that provides true integration at a very affordable price. When we think about all the different functions within Resource Manager, We talked about the e-purchasing and the AP request and time management aspects of Resource Manager in the last session. This session is going to focus on the expense portion, but there are other project management-based scheduling and resource planning tools that come with Resource Manager, and other requests such as internal item usage, sales quotations, or custom requisitions, where you can build workflows around any process within Sage 300, and also custom reporting, pay stub distribution via the portal if you're using it with timesheets integrated with payroll, schedulers, and reminders that people can access via a calendar. So let's focus on the expense tracking and walk you through a couple of slides, and then we'll take you through a transaction within the application itself. So just to note some of the key highlights of this solution, we can attach documents to support expenses both in the portal and the mobile app. We have limit checking for daily, monthly, or yearly per diems for meals or airfare hotel expenses. You can configure the system to auto-insert commonly used expense codes so employees don't have to start from scratch every time they create a new expense report. Or you can simply copy an expense report from a previous week or period. It also supports billable, non-billable, reimbursable, and non-reimbursable types of expenses. So whether you're billing back to clients or whether you're using corporate credit cards and the expenses are not reimbursable to the employee, you can still record them on the expense report, track them as non-reimbursable, but use the claims on the expense report to match with the accrual for the payable to the credit card vendor in accounts payable. There's a report that summarizes the expenses by period and by employee, and you have options as to whether you want to reimburse these expenses through accounts payable or the payroll module of Sage 300. The portal provides browser-based entry and approval. The back office is where the expense transactions are recorded as a batch entry, and you have the option to do reimbursements also through a norming payment reimbursement option within Resource Manager, or as I mentioned, through accounts payable or payroll. So let's go over and take a look at the application itself, and we'll start with the portal itself. These portals are completely customizable, so you can change the background color, you can change the logo and link to a web page on your corporate website, and you have access to be able to substitute employees. So as an employee, I'm able to have someone else enter my expenses on my behalf if I need to, or as a manager, I can have someone else do the approvals for a specified period of time based on when I'm going to be away. I also have the option to customize this homepage, so I could hide icons that I'm not using. So if I don't need a reminder or I don't need a list of contacts, I can exclude that from the homepage, save it, and when I go back to the homepage, the contacts disappears. So I'm only looking at the applications that I use within Resource Manager. Now there's also the back office component of Resource Manager. As I mentioned, will be focused on the expenses, and it will create a transaction batch for those expenses. But in order to record these expenses, I need to set up the expense codes first. So by setting up these expense codes, I'm allowing you to create multiple types of expense codes that are linked directly to a GL account, so your employees don't have to remember the GL account distribution because they probably don't care anyways. And you have the option here to record expenses in any currency that you wish. You can also establish a billing rate to charge those expenses out to your customers as needed. Optional fields are supported. The taxes would be picked up from the tax jurisdictions in the tax services component of common services. So we're not having to duplicate the effort. We just simply use the existing tax authorities that you've set up within Sage 300. And then you can also attach notes so that you can record information that's relevant to the type of expense being recorded. You notice that if you're billing, you could create an AR item number to do the billing on an AR invoice to a client. And right now, this expense is recorded as reimbursable, but it could be a credit card expense on a corporate credit card, which is not reimbursable back to the employee. You can have multiple codes, and then we can also specify limits. A daily limit might be a meals per diem charge. Monthly basis could be airfare. You're limiting how much an employee can spend on airfare on a monthly basis. Or you might just be tracking year-to-date or annual expense limits based on the type of transactions or travel activities that employees need to conduct. Once we've set up all these different expense codes, then we have the ability to attach those to the employees. So Resource Manager has an employee register where you assign the expense codes to individual employees or by employee group. And these employees are required because we need to track the expenses against these employees. What we record as part of the system is some basic HR information, but I want to be clear that Resource Manager is not positioned as an HR system. And then on the processing page, we assign division, region, department information about that employee. So they're able to record expenses by department or by division or region and allocate them appropriately. We specify who their direct report is, the supervisor, so that we can identify as part of the workflow approval who these expenses need to be approved by. And then the expense control page actually puts the expense codes that I'm allowed to claim as an employee, the GL account that they're going to be recorded against, and whether or not we're specifying limits, as we talked about just a minute ago. Those limits could be dollar value limits, or they could be quantity limits. So in the case of mileage reimbursements, you could put a quantity limit of 5,000 kilometers so that they can only claim the 52 cents a kilometer up to 5,000 kilometers. And then you would use a separate expense code for kilometers driven more than 5,000 at 46 cents a kilometer. When you specify these limits, you can have a warning that will identify when you've gone over your limit for the period or the year, or you can place an error condition, which will stop the expense report from being submitted until the amount is dropped down below the budget. You'll see an example of the warning being used in my presentation today. And finally, the approval workflows is where we specify how we want the expense report routed through the system for approval purposes. So as an expense report, I can set up a definition for the roles, and that defines who can participate within the workflow approval. So the supervisor, as you saw within the employee register, is my direct report, but you might have a multi-level approval where you're going to have managers at a division, department, or region level. If you're working with project and job cost, you can also have project managers or task managers involved as part of the approval process. You can also use the concept of approver groups, where if I specify a group of 3 managers, I may require that 2 of those 3 managers approve the expense report. The other thing I'd like to highlight as part of the approval workflow is what we call a decision action. A decision action allows you to create your own business logic, so you can embed your own parameters around dollar value thresholds or other conditions like the nature of the expense, or if I go over budget, I need a higher level of approval within the organization. As you can see within this workflow, if a document total is less than $200, I may not need an approval. If it's between 200 and 500, I might need 1 level of approval. If it's greater than 500, I might need 2 levels of approval or a person at a higher level within the organization to approve the expense. So you can build these types of parameters to customize the business logic for how a document is approved and reviewed within the system. Notice as well that we use email as an alert function. So the submission, rejection, and approval of expense reports can be notified via email. And as we talked about at the beginning, we have email templates that could be picked up on a mobile device. So we can notify employees when their expense report has been approved, or if it was rejected, you might use the notes feature we saw with the expense codes to identify policies. And if those policies are not met, then that would be the reason why an expense was rejected. Or we might have a submission reminder so to notify supervisors and managers that an employee has submitted an expense report and it needs approval. And because we're linked through a web portal, we can specify a URL hot link, which the manager or supervisor can then just click on the link, and it will take them to the web portal so they can see the to approved list and do the approval. So let's walk you through an example. As you can see, when you access the portal, you can see previously posted and approved expense reports. So the history of how many expenses I've submitted during the year is visible if you want to publish that to the portal. And then also expense reports at different statuses. So in this case, we have 4 expenses that have been approved but not posted through for reimbursement, 2 that are still awaiting approval, none that have been rejected, thankfully, and 1 that's open that was started but hasn't been submitted for approval. When we click on the New button, it exposes a new expense form, and you notice that because we use that auto insert feature, 4 expense lines are automatically populated with a per diem amount. But I can still go in and modify or update the amount. So let's say this is a conference in Chicago. And by the way, if I was running multi-currency in this company, I would see a separate currency column on the expense form. And even though it might be a Canadian-based company, I could still record expenses in US dollars, and the system could pick up the exchange rate between US and Canadian dollars from the multi-currency tables in Sage and translate that to a Canadian equivalent. Likewise, I can update the hotel and say that was the Hilton in Rosemont. And I might have taxi. Now you notice mileage is 0. If I leave an expense code with a $0 amount, the system automatically removes that from the expense report when I submit it for approval. But now I've got my airfare here, and I might want to add an attachment. So I want to flag this line and say that this is my airfare receipt. And I browse to pick up a copy of that receipt. So I could have taken a picture of this, or I might have it on an email, and I want to pick that up and attach it. So going through the downloads, if you're familiar with the downloads in Windows, this is information that's been attached in emails that I can pick up through a download folder that's automatically set up within the Windows desktop. So I've attached an airfare receipt, and now I want to attach a hotel receipt. So this is the Hilton receipt, and many hotels now will send you PDF copies of the receipt that you can grab from an email. So I'm just going to grab this folio here and save. And I could also add a tax receipt if I'd taken a picture of that. But now I've got a couple of attachments that are going to support the expenses on the expense report, and this will also be visible during the approval process. Notice that I could also import. So if I'm importing a credit card file, I would create a mapping table, let's say in an Excel XLS format, and I could download the credit card file to populate the lines on an expense report. As I mentioned, we could also copy a line and pick up a second hotel charge if we wanted to do that. In this case, I'm going to remove that line. And then if we need to calculate tax, we can click the Calculate Tax button, or we could enter the tax automatically when we set up the expense. And that becomes particularly important when we're dealing with meals, because we have tips and tax related to the meals expense. I'm going to go ahead and save and then submit the expense report. And you notice that there's validation here that the task line is invalid. So I'm not logged into Sage 300, but I'm still going to have to make sure that I'm entering information on the expense report that is valid for Sage 300 transaction purposes. The other thing that we can do is check that limit. Remember, we talked about the limits. So when we pick up the limits, you'll see that I've got an amount limit based on my limit checking. My limit was $1,000, per month for airfare, hotel, and $200 for taxi. Well, I've actually spent $790 on airfare, and so there's only $210 available. But this report is going to be $487, so I'm actually going to be over my limit, and that's why you're going to see a warning that I'm going over the limit, both for air and hotel. You can also assign GL account budget. So if I had a budget amount for the period or for the year, you would see that the budget amount will be reduced by any pending amounts on other expense reports, and it will show you what's available. Likewise, on a year-to-date basis, it will take the budget amount less anything actually expensed and any pending expenses on other expense reports and show you what's available. So you can see that at both the GL account level as well as an amount limit level within the system. When I go ahead to submit, now you get the warning message that I'm over my GL account budget, and I'm also over my airfare limit for the month. But because I just made this a warning and not an error message, I can continue past the warning message in order to submit the expense report. And once I do, I can now see the approval and the full path. So based on the nature of the expense, remember the dollar value thresholds I showed you, I had 3 different levels of threshold: under 200, between 200 and 500, and over 500. So in this case, it was supervisor level for under 200, regional manager between 200 and 500, and a specified person if it's above 500. So you can create that kind of logic in your workflows, and the system actually flowcharts it for you. So now the manager or the supervisor would receive a notification on their smartphone, or when they log into the portal, they would see on their to approved list that there is an expense report that needs their approval. And there's the expense report EV43 that we just created. And all 3 lines need to be approved. Now, in terms of the attachments, if I've got the airfare receipt, I can see clearly the airfare that's been charged. And there's the support for my airfare. And then in the case of a hotel, I can see the hotel charges and what was recorded against the expense report to validate the amounts on that report. Now, if for some reason there were unique expenses, I could actually make an ad hoc change to the workflow and transfer this expense report to another manager for their approval. But in this case, I'm going to just simply accept it, say okay. There's just the 1 level of approval on this expense report. So once it's approved, where does it end up? In the back office of Sage 300. So the expense batch list has been created automatically. And there is EV43. And it's noted as an expense report from the ESS, or Employee Self-Service Portal. And all of the information that was recorded against the expense report in the portal has now been recorded within the back office of Sage 300. And we bring across the approval audit trail. The attachments are here and visible within Sage 300, the totals, the taxes, and the document details. I can still see the budget information. So I have the amount limits and the fact that I've gone over. And if I'm okay with all of this, then I post. Now, in this case, we're reimbursing through AP. So the employee is also set up as a vendor, and we default the AP invoice number to match the expense voucher number. And again, the budget controls are here so we can verify all of that. But if I'm okay with everything, I just go ahead and post, and the system creates an AP invoice for me. And when I go up to AP and I open up the invoice batch list, if there's a currently open batch, it will show me that it's EN generated, which is the product code for Resource Manager. And it shows me if my last entry has been recorded correctly. This is my expense entry for EV43 allocated to the GL accounts for those amounts that were recorded. You notice the comments come through as well. And if I want to see the document attached, I could either use document management link and pop it up here in AP, or I record it as part of Resource Manager and I drill from the AP screen down into Resource Manager where I can see the approval audit trail and the attachments. So the audit trail is maintained for you to be able to see all the detail if someone in accounts payable is not related specifically with the expense process. So that's how we can record expenses quickly and easily within Sage 300. So if you have any questions, we invite you to send them in, or you can speak with your BAASS account manager, and they will be more than pleased to follow up with you with any pricing or product information details that you need. Thank you for attending. We appreciate you being here today for BAASS Connect 2021 and hope that you have a great day. Thank you.